Hi, this is The Philosophical Angle, and I'm your host, Chris Angle. I'm the author of 4 books on philosophy, one of which is The Nature of Aesthetics. And you can see these books free for viewing online at www.philosophypublishing.com. The purpose of The Philosophical Angle is to analyze the current topics and concepts being used in media, to see if how it shapes up to how they're being used. So today's topic is from a Wall Street Journal editorial dated February 8th, 2013, from the Review and Outlook column, the Ayatollah always says no. And so I'm going to read a few passages from this editorial so that you get a flavor of what's going on, and then we'll go to explicate it. Khomeini rejects another U.S. offer. Maybe he wants a bomb. Obviously, the nuclear bomb. In the second paragraph, it says, we're speaking of the administration's latest effort to come to terms with Tehran over its nuclear programs, which Mr. Biden made last week at the Munich Security Conference. The next paragraph. On Thursday, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, flatly rejected direct talks with the U.S. He stated, the U.S. is pointing a gun at Iran and wants us to talk to them. The Ayatollah said, direct talks will not solve any problems. In the next paragraph, the Wall Street Journal says, just after becoming president in 2009, Mr. Obama sent the Ayatollah 2 private letters and delivered a conciliatory speech for the Persian New Year of Nowruz. Mr. Khomeini's answer, quote, they chant the slogan of change, but no change is seen in practice. End of quote. He told a crowd chanting, death to America, that, quote, if a hand is stretched covered with a velvet glove, but it is cast iron inside, that makes no sense. End of quote. The next paragraph from the Wall Street Journal Review and Outlook editorial. That was in March 2009. In October of that year, the U.S. and its allies tentatively worked out a deal with Iranian negotiators to move some of their enriched uranium outside Iran. Later, the Ayatollah quashed that deal too. He said, whenever they, Americans, smile at the officials of the Islamic Revolution, when we carefully look at the situation, we notice that they are hiding a dagger behind their back. End of quote. It was the same in January 2011 when diplomacy also collapsed. Ditto in 2012. Why does the Ayatollah keep saying no? The journal asks rhetorically. A more persuasive explanation, get ready for this shocker, is that Iran really wants a bomb. Later, the journal says, meantime, the pretense of negotiations has allowed Tehran to play for time to advance its programs. In the next paragraph, as for the sanctions, they may hurt ordinary Iranians, but this regime is famously indifferent to the sufferings of its own people. In conclusion, the journal states, in rejecting Mr. Biden's offer, the Ayatollah said frankly, I'm not a diplomat. I'm a revolutionary. let's go and take a look at the situation. In the U.S., we have, obviously, as everybody knows, a separation of church and state. That is, religion remains separate from the secular political organization of the state mechanisms. And thus from the state we get, well, not from the state, from the people, of course, we get our Constitution and the Bill of Rights, rules that the state must operate from. The church, or those religious practitioners, they also operate from their respective religious constitutions, if you will, such as the Bible, the Koran, the Torah. So, the West operates under this separation. But Islam, or the Middle East, is a little bit different. They have secular laws and secular states there within their rules, but it is not separate from the Quran. The Quran is superior to any secular rules originating by the state. And thus it's a theocracy. The Quran is always superior and will trump any needs of the state. And one of those states is Iran. After all, the supreme ruler is the Ayatollah, or the Ayatollah. Thus, when considering the behavior of Iran, we must consider verses of the Quran, as this is its modus operandi. First, the supreme leader is religious, and from there we can see how the state is guided by these religious principles. So let's see what kind of principles are guiding some of the behavior, and see if we can apply it to the Ayatollah's behavior, as indicated here in this journal editorial page, Review and Outlook column. Probably the first one we should take a look at is right out of the Quran. We're going to take some verses from the Quran, and the Quran is organized into chapters called surah, and then when in each chapter are verses. One that's particularly relevant is seek out your enemies relentlessly. Surah 4, verse 103. In Surah 2, verse 190, a very famous one, slay them wherever you find them. Idolatry is worse than carnage. Fight against them until idolatry is no more and God's religion reigns supreme. Well, maybe they don't have to fight, or do they? Well, in Surah 2:16, fighting is obligatory for you, much as you dislike it. And from the Hadith, now Hadith is a collection of sayings from Muhammad that weren't necessarily coming directly from the angel Gabriel, which comprise the Quran. From the Hadith we know that this last verse, that fighting is obligatory, was narrated at a time that Muhammad was actually trying to motivate his people into raiding merchant caravans for loot. And unlike nearly all of the Old Testaments of violence, the verses of the Quran are mostly open-ended. meaning that they're not constrained in any historical context whatsoever. As a matter of fact, the Quran is organized from the largest chapter down to the smallest chapter, and so the context in which you read it, there isn't any. There's no chronological order that you can follow, although historians go and try and search out the chronological text, or the and those scholars try to make books on the Quran from their studies. But the Quran is part of an eternal, unchanging word of Allah. Now, I have read the Quran, and I cannot find, to compensate what we've just spoke about, these verses of violence, I cannot find any specific verses of peace, such as we can find in the New Testament. In the New Testament, we find, and I'll get back to that later, that there's a slight qualification there. In the New Testament, we have many. Mark 9, verse 50, salt is good, but if the salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. In Luke 6, verse 27, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Romans 12:17, by the Apostle Paul, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. Matthew 5:9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. In the book of John, several references to peace. In John 14:27, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. John 16:33, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. John 20, verse 19, on the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, peace be with you. In Romans 14, chapter 14, verse 17 through 19, for the kingdom of God is not a matter of eating and drinking, but of righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit. Whoever thus serves Christ is acceptable to God and approved by men. So then, let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbringing. This is quite in contrast to the previous Quranic expressions. And here's another one in Quran 2, verse 191, a rather famous one. And slay them wherever you find them, and drive them out of the places whence they drove you out, for persecution of Muslims is worse than slaughter of non-believers. But if they desist, then lo, Allah is forgiving and merciful, and fight them until persecution is no more and religion is for Allah. In other words, you must fight for Allah, but if the people of the book, such as the Jews and the Christians, say, okay, we give up, it's okay. Then the Muslims are commanded by the Quran to desist. However, as guided by the Quran, it indicates that they have to pay a submission tax called the jizya. And all will be well. And that's how, for example, inside Iran, there are pockets of Christian worship and Christianity and Jews throughout throughout the Middle East within Islamic states. But they're not allowed to proselytize, and so they don't expand, but they do exist. Now, I'm just going to read a couple more Quranic verses just to confirm my point. The Quran 4, verse 104. And be not weak-hearted in pursuit of the enemy. If you suffer pain, then surely they, too, suffer pain as you suffer pain. Thus, Quran, Surah 2, verse 244, then fight in the cause of Allah, and know that Allah heareth and knoweth all things. In Quran 4:74, let those fight in the way of Allah who sell the life of this world for the other. Whoso fighteth in the way of Allah, he be slain, or be he victorious, on him we shall bestow a vast reward. And here is the ideological basis for today's suicide bombers and the Islamic religion and government leaders of all times, and thus the Ayatollah of Iran. But the Quran doesn't stop there. Quran 4:74, those who believe fight in the cause of Allah. Just in case you feel that this is in regard to spiritual struggle. The Quran 8:12 says, I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. Therefore strike off their heads and strike off every fingertip of them. And thus this, from this little quaint little custom the quaint little custom of beheading emerges, and which you can see on an occasional video coming out of the Middle East. And it's because it's mandated in the Quran. So now you might say, well, Muhammad is only talking about the polytheists. He wasn't really talking about the Christians and the Jews who are people of the book. Well, from Surah 17, verse 111, say, praise be to God who has never begotten a son, who has no partner in his kingdom. A reference to Jesus being the Son of Man in the Bible, that is, in the Christian Bible. Surah 5, verse 51, believers, take neither Jews nor Christians for your friends. Surah 9:27, fight against such as those to whom the scriptures were given, Jews and Christians, until they pay tribute out of hand and are utterly subdued. I referred to that just previously. Say, praise be to God who has never begotten a son, who has no partner in his kingdom. Surah 17, verse 111. But there is, so I also stated that outside of certainly outside of the Muslim religion or the Islamic religion, there is not much basis for peace. But within the Quran, and if you are a believer, a Quranic believer, then there is peace within the Quran. And in Surah 48:29 it states, Muhammad is God's apostle. For those who follow him are ruthless to the unbelievers, but merciful to one another. So inside Islamic thought, there is to be peace within the believers. Okay, so let's go back here and go back to our original problem of the bomb. Iran needs a bomb, and they need it because they need the power to facilitate the implementation of the Koran, as we have just outlined. The obvious power that the bomb gives a society will allow the Islamic leaders to attain more of their goals. So it's an obvious need for them. And from the Quran, we know that the verses and the words of the Prophet Muhammad, as told to him from the angel Gabriel, are the words of Allah. And thus, the Quran says that these words are immutable. They cannot be changed. So it is very difficult to negotiate under these circumstances. So now what? We need to prevent a bomb. We need to prevent terrorism. It's difficult to negotiate. Because the directives out of the Quran are clear. And one of the directives are that when negotiating with a non-believer, Sharia law says that it has to be advantageous to the Muslim society. Otherwise, they can't go forward with it. If it's too advantageous for the non-Islamic society, it is against Sharia to go forward with the agreement. So there are two, you have inside and outside types of behavior for the Islamic society. Inside Islamic society, the Quran dictates morality and peace and merciful behavior. But outside, there's no obligation. It's that which, the only obligation is to do that which is advantageous of the Islamic society. So, how does the Western society deal with this situation? Well, to prevent the bomb and to help to prevent the bomb and terrorism, we really need to present an overriding problem there in the Middle East, to concentrate their problems there before they come for us. Because as we've seen throughout history, especially in the 8th century, Islam went all throughout North Africa, headed up Europe, went all the way and right up into close to Tours, France, where Charles Martel, the hammer, stopped them. There was several times, and before and after the Crusades, that European society was in trouble from Muslim and Islamic aggression coming out of the Middle East. So to present the problem, as the Crusades did, presenting a problem inside their society, they will concentrate on it. And as you know, listening from many of the statements out of Iran and other places of the Islamic states of the Middle East, they concentrate on the problem of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And it becomes a conflict between Israel and the rest of the Middle East, the rest of the Islamic states. And thus, really, to help us here in the Western world, to help Europe, to help the United States, from Islamic aggression, we need to support Israel. Make sure that that state stays healthy and stays where it is. And that'll help the rest of the Western society to stay safe. We will continue this discussion in the future, and so be sure to join back with us from time to time to discuss the problem of Islamic societies coexisting with the West. And thank you for joining us with the philosophical angle.